In this chapter, we're going to examine the autonomic nervous system. Remember, this is a branch of our nervous system that operates without conscious control. In this chapter, we'll compare structural and functional features of the somatic nervous system and the autonomic system. I have a list on a couple of slides of several different objectives for this, and you'll see a lot of this. We'll be looking at the differences between the autonomic and the somatic nervous system and talking about the function. We'll look at the different branches of the autonomic system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and how they differ, and describe what those two branches do. We'll also look briefly at the components of a visceral reflex arc and talk about pain. We'll look at some of the neurotransmitters and how drugs can affect the action of those neurotransmitters. We'll talk about how the autonomic nervous system divisions work together, how one can sort of dominate or control the other in certain situations. Talk about the control of those two. Describe how the central nervous system can affect the autonomic nervous system, and then briefly look at some imbalances associated with the autonomic nervous system. All right, so let's get started. I wanted to first give you an overview of the entire nervous system and remind you that the central nervous system, of course, consists of the brain and spinal cord. Sensory input is brought in from our special senses, such as our sense of smell and vision and taste, hearing, and equilibrium, and the somatic senses, the senses of the body, the tactile, or touch, the temperature, so different somatic sensations of the body. So all of these are brought in through the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system into the central nervous system for processing. Of course, then if an action is to be taken, an impulse is then sent, hang on, my computer's decided it wants to act crazy this morning. There we go. An impulse is sent out through the motor division. That motor division may send an impulse and information out to the somatic nervous division, which will then lead to skeletal muscle being contracted, or that action, that impulse, may be sent out through the autonomic nervous system. Now remember, autonomic nervous system is our involuntary automatic nervous system. And in that, or as a part of that autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches that are going to be our rest and digest, or the fight or flight branches of the nervous system that may cause smooth muscle and cardiac muscle to contract or to relax, may cause glands to secrete or to not secrete. And then also, as we've already mentioned when we looked at the branches of the nervous system, the enteric system is a part of the autonomic system that helps to regulate the contractions of the smooth muscle of the gastrointestinal tract. So we will focus on this particular area of the nervous system in this lecture. Let's have a little bit more detail on the description and look at some of the differences between the somatic and autonomic nervous system. So remember, the somatic nervous system consists of somatic, or of the body, motor neurons that innervate skeletal muscle. So when a somatic motor neuron stimulates the skeletal muscle, it contracts, and the action is always excitatory. So a motor neuron always excites a skeletal muscle to contract. The somatic nervous system usually operates under voluntary or conscious control. So we have voluntary control of movement. But in order for that to happen, a motor area of the cerebral cortex has to activate somatic motor neurons whenever you have the desire to move. For instance, if you decide to get up from your desk and walk to the refrigerator, your cerebral cortex had to stimulate motor neurons that then stimulated those muscles to contract to allow you to get up. The somatic nervous system also has to be able to receive sensory input from sensory neurons that convey information for those somatic senses, such as tactile, the sense of touch, or pain, or temperature changes, or proprioceptive sensations, which really is just the position of the body. The special senses such as sight, hearing, and taste, equilibrium, all of those sensory neurons have to bring that information into the somatic nervous system as well. But all of these sensations are normally consciously perceived. So we know that something is touching us, or that we see something, or that the temperature of something is too warm or too cold. So in response to all this sensory information, somatic sensory neurons will then cause an appropriate response of the skeletal muscles by contracting. In contrast, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that regulates cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. So these glands, of course, and the cardiac and the smooth muscle are going to be called effectors. So these tissues are often referred to as visceral effectors, because viscera means that they are associated with the internal organs. The autonomic nervous system consists of autonomic motor neurons that regulate visceral activities by increasing or exciting or decreasing, inhibiting ongoing activities in the tissues, such as the cardiac or smooth muscle and the glands. Also, changes in the dilation of the pupil to make it smaller, the diameter of the pupil, dilating and constricting blood vessels to help maintain blood flow, and changing the rate and the force of the heart rate are all examples of autonomic responses. So the autonomic nervous system is without conscious control, so it's involuntary. You can't voluntarily slow down the beating of your heart. You can't voluntarily change the diameter of your blood vessels. We'll see that the autonomic nervous system is going to be composed of two branches that we call the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and we'll examine those in more detail. So just a little review of what we've seen already, the autonomic versus the somatic nervous system. Both of those systems are going to have motor fibers. What differs are the effectors, or what those motor fibers are stimulating. So remember, your somatic nervous system will have motor fibers that are going to stimulate skeletal muscle. Your autonomic system will have motor fibers that are going to stimulate the viscera, organs, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. Now, they are integrated, which simply means that they work together, and that means that the skeletal muscles can cause changes in the visceral organs, such as when some of your muscles of the abdomen contract. That can put pressure on the organs within and cause different sensations or cause constriction within the abdomen. Differences are the effectors, the skeletal muscle versus the viscerals. We also have some differences in which neurotransmitters are released, and then, of course, their effect on the tissues that those neurotransmitters bind to, and the pathway of how those actions occur. So the efferent or efferent, remember E means exit, so these are pathways from the division of the nervous system out to those effectors, and this varies between the autonomic and the somatic, as we'll see in just a few minutes on another slide. Alright, so continuing with our differences, the effectors, remember somatic is going to stimulate skeletal muscle, autonomic will stimulate cardiac and smooth muscle and glands. The neurotransmitters, the autonomic nervous system stimulates epinephrine and norepinephrine. So typically norepinephrine from the somatic nervous system, and perhaps acetylcholine from the sympathetic nervous system, and the effect of these neurotransmitters will depend on the receptors on a particular type of tissue that they bind. The somatic nervous system, remember, is going to release acetylcholine, which is always excitatory. The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, may stimulate some tissues and may inhibit the action of another. So, for instance, the sympathetic nervous system can increase heart rate by releasing norepinephrine, which we commonly call adrenaline. The parasympathetic can release acetylcholine, and that acetylcholine is going to slow the rate of cardiac muscle contraction. So again, the action of the neurotransmitter depends on the target tissue. So the efferent or efferent pathways and where those cell bodies are located are also different in the somatic versus the autonomic nervous system. In the somatic nervous system, the somatic nervous system, the bodies of the neurons are going to be found in nuclei in the central nervous system. Now remember, nuclei refers to a group of cell bodies. So found in the nuclei, not a structure known as a ganglia. The cell fibers, the fiber types of those neurons are going to be what are known as type A fibers, so they're very thick and they transmit nerve impulses very fast. And we have a pathway of one neuron from the central nervous system with an axon that extends out to skeletal muscle. We'll see an image of this on the next slide. In the autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, we have type B or C nerve fibers, which the thing to remember here is that they transmit impulses much more slowly. And there are two types of neurons, a preganglionic neuron that's found inside the central nervous system and a postganglionic neuron that's found outside the central nervous system that goes to the effector. Now, let me point these terms out again here. Remember, a group of cell bodies in the central nervous system is a nuclei. A group of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system is known as ganglia. So if you look here at just a very brief illustration showing you the difference of the somatic nervous system. So here we have a cell body located within the spinal cord. Remember, the spinal cord is a part of the central nervous system, and you have one motor neuron one somatic motor neuron going out and releasing acetylcholine that will stimulate the effector, which is the skeletal muscle, to contract. On the other hand, if you look at the autonomic nervous system, you have a cell body in each of these examples, and they're all a little bit different, but let's just use this as an example of the pathway. You have one cell body that is located in the spinal cord, so in the sympathetic nervous system, and its axon extends out to a ganglion. So that's an autonomic ganglion. So remember, ganglia is a group of cell bodies clustered together. So you have neuron number 1, axon comes out, and you have a ganglia that is an accumulation of cell bodies. So neuron number 1 comes in, it's going to release its neurotransmitter to the cells that are within that ganglia, and then neuron number 2, the postsynaptic, or the postganglionic, after the ganglion neuron, is going to be the one that goes out to the effectors. So you have a 2 neuronal pathway, with the first neuron being with the cell body in the central nervous system, goes out to the ganglion. At the ganglion, then the second motor neuron is going to go out and stimulate the effectors. You see the same thing here on the bottom of this image as well. There is a pathway where the adrenal medulla is stimulated to release epi and norepi, again, what we commonly call adrenaline. That is a little bit different. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But remember, in most cases, the autonomic system uses a 2 motor neuron pathway, where the somatic uses just the 1. Functionally, the autonomic system is divided into 2 major branches. The sympathetic part of the autonomic system is usually referred to as the fight or flight division, because it stimulates movement, it stimulates energy, it stimulates metabolism, it stimulates alertness. So you can think of this as your E system. So E for emergency, exercise, and embarrassment. So what happens if you are driving down the road and a car pulls out in front of you? Immediately you jump to attention. Your pupils dilate so that you can see better. Your heart rate is pounding. Why is your heart rate pounding? Well, it's trying to deliver more blood, carrying more oxygen out to skeletal muscle tissues so that you can make more ATP and have that energy to power muscle contractions so you can fight or flight, right? You're going to have to get out of a stressful situation. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is sometimes referred to as the rest and digest division, because it slows down most body activity. So think of it as the D system. Digest, you know what that means. Defecation, you know what that is. And diuresis, that's just producing and getting rid of urine. So think about what your body is doing at these times. You're not in stressful situations. You are resting and digesting. So if you're walking through the woods and you come up on that hypothetical bear, right? You have that emergency action, the fight or flight response from the sympathetic nervous system. But what's happening to the rest of your body? So the parts of your body, your skeletal muscle and your heart rate increases and your pupils dilate, all of that happens so that you can prepare to get your body out of a stressful situation. But at the same time, your parasympathetic nervous system is slowing down everything to do with those functions that you don't need to be focusing on when you're in that stressful situation, right? So you're going to have some vasoconstriction or narrowing of the blood vessels that are associated with the digestive system, with the colon, and with the urinary system, so that you're not doing all of those processes that might lead you to have to pause and take a break for a few minutes. The origin of the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic neuronal cells are a little bit different as well. The parasympathetic cell bodies of preganglionic neurons are located in the brain and spinal cord. Now remember, preganglionic simply means before the ganglion, and the ganglion is that enlarged little mass of cells. The sympathetic cell bodies of preganglionic neurons are located in the spinal cord. And we'll see a picture of all this on the next slide. The fiber lengths are different as well. The parasympathetic axons have very long preganglionic structures and short axons after the ganglion. And it's just the opposite in the sympathetic nervous system. So you have short preganglionic axons and long ganglionic axons. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh my God, how am I going to remember all this? I'll show you a picture in just a second. And then where those ganglia are located differ in the sympathetic and the parasympathetic as well, with the parasympathetic ganglia being closer to those visceral effectors, to the organs and the glands and the muscle, the cardiac and smooth muscle, whereas with the sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia are going to be located closer to the spinal cord. So if we look at this image, yes, it's pretty complicated, but this just simply shows us everything that we just looked at. So on this particular side of the image, we're looking at the sympathetic nervous system. On this side, we're looking at the parasympathetic nervous system. So here's the spinal cord. Notice in the sympathetic nervous system, you have a chain of ganglia on the left and the right. So that's what is called your sympathetic chain or sympathetic trunk ganglia. Now we just have the axons coming out here on we have the axons coming out here on this side so that you can see those axons and the pathways out to the organs. But it points out what we were just talking about. Remember, the ganglia in the sympathetic nervous system are going to be closer to the spinal cord. So when you do a dissection, if you do the cat dissection, you can see that the sympathetic chain ganglia are located very close to the spinal cord in the cats. So here you have very short preganglionic axons because there's not much distance for that axon to travel from the spinal cord out to the ganglion. But then you have very long ganglia very long axons in that second motor neuron where the body is within that ganglia, and the nerve axon has to extend all the way out to those effectors. And then we have the opposite situation in the parasympathetic nervous system. So the ganglia are located farther away. Okay, so they're out much further away from the spinal cord. Seems like there was something I was going to tell you there. Well, we'll just look at the nerve fibers, okay? So the ganglia are going to be much closer to the effectors, which means that you're going to have longer axons on your preganglionic axons, and then shorter axons going out to those effectors, so your postganglionic axons.